are witnessing the words of the prophets come to life in these last days. And all of the signs point to the fact that the coming of the Messiah, HaMashiach, is imminent and at the door. And we should be prepared. However, if you cannot see the writing on the wall, which is so clear in these last days, it may be too late for you. You may be too deceived to be able to understand the relevance of the Messiah and his coming, and you may not even understand the fact that you are deceived, because that's how deception works. After all, the one who is deceived does not even realize it. The scriptures tell us in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 9, the coming of the lawless one is according to the working of Satan, or Hashatan, with all power and signs and wonders of falsehood, and with all deceit of unrighteousness in those perishing, because they did not receive the love of the truth in order for them to be saved. And for this reason, Elohim sends them a working of delusion, for them to believe the falsehood, in order that all should be judged who did not believe the truth, but have delighted in the unrighteousness. And we see in these last days that sin and lawlessness and unrighteousness is abounding all over the world, and that the United States of America pushes this lawlessness and unrighteousness to the four corners of the earth using Hollywood, and that our own media in the States are nothing more than propaganda, constant, non-stop bombarding of propaganda. They push sexual deviances, they push violence, they push destruction, they push all types of perversities in these last days to capture your mind, to seize your mind, so that you will be deceived. And the scriptures tell us very clearly that because they love the lie, because they love the deception, that Elohim, Yahuwah, the creator of heaven and earth, will send them a delusion because they love the lie. And that this is all coming about in these last days. The lawless one who comes is synonymous with this idea of anti-Messiah or antichrist that's coming. This idea is according to all the power of Satan, is what it says, to do lying signs and wonders. Now, in the book of Revelation, chapter 12, verse 9, we read, "And the great dragon was thrown out, that serpent of old, called the devil and Satan, or Satan, who leads all the world astray. He was thrown to the earth, and his messengers were thrown out with him." So this is very important, because we know that the book of Revelation tells us that Satan deceives the world, that Satan is the old serpent, is what it says. That Satan is the dragon, but he is also the serpent of old. Now in Genesis, or Bereshith, chapter 3, verse 1, we read, "And the serpent," or in Hebrew the term is Nahash, "was more crafty than any beast of the field which Yahuwah Elohim had made. And he said to the woman, Is it true that Elohim has said, do not eat of every tree of the garden?" And we know how this dialogue continues on. And eventually Hawa, who has been called Eve, eats from the tree and gives to her husband Adam to eat. And this is how sin and death entered into the world, via the serpent who deceived Hawa, or Eve, into eating this fruit. So this is really important, because this term serpent in Hebrew, Nahash, doesn't just mean a serpent. When you look it up, you will find that Nahash means several things. One of the meanings of the word Nahash is literally an enchanter, a sorcerer, one who divines, one who does witchcraft. And we see such an example right in the book of Numbers, or Bamidbar. In the book of Numbers, Bamidbar 23, verse 23, we read, "For there is no sorcery against Yaakov, nor is there any divination against Yisrael. Now, in this context, we see the word sorcery is Nahash. There is no Nahash or sorcery against Jacob or Jacob, nor is there any divination or kesem against Yisrael. Now it is said to Jacob and to Yisrael, what has El done? Now these are famous words from the false prophet Balaam. Balaam was paid to curse Israel. And when Balaam was paid to curse Israel, he responded he could only do whatever Yahuwah Elohim said. Now Balaam used Nahash or divination to seek the will of Yahuwah. We read that right in this same section of verses, that he used this as a means so that he could attempt to prophesy. However, when he did this, he received the prophetic revelation that there is no Nahash, there is no sorcery against Israel. Now remember, Nahash again is not just sorcery and enchantment and divination, but also that old serpent called Hashatan. Now, I want to go a little further to prove a point in the book of Deuteronomy, or Devarim chapter 18, about how important it is to abstain from witchcraft and sorcery and magic and all these things, according to the scriptures, to participate in such activities, to worship idols, to burn incense to idols, to call on idols, to make oaths in the names of other idols and various things like this, is a capital punishment. There is a death penalty. This is what the Torah says, Deuteronomy 18, starting in verse 10. Let no one be found among you who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, because the ancient pagans would burn their children to Molech and to other deities. Or one who practices divination, or a user of magic, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or a medium, or a spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. For whosoever does these are an abomination to Yahuwah, the supreme creator of heaven and earth. And because of these abominations, Yahuwah, your Elohim, drives them out from before you. So the other nations practiced witchcraft and sorcery. That is why Yahuwah drove them out. Israel was not supposed to. They were supposed to seek prophetic revelation from Yahuwah himself, not through using divination and witchcraft and sorcery. Now there are a multitude of Hebrew words we could examine here that deal with divination and sorcery and magic, but for time's sake, we're just going to move forward. But the basic word for sorcery is usually kesem. Sometimes, again, it is Nahash, which is the word for the serpent of old, who was a sorcerer, by the way. Very important to understand this. So the Torah forbids sorcery, magic, soothsaying, all this. Now in the book of Revelation further, we read about the whore of Babylon. Just about everybody knows about the whore of Babylon, at least has heard of her, so I'm not going to give her a major introduction. However, we read of her judgment in the book of Revelation, chapter 18, verse 23. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in you, and the voice of the bridegroom and of the bride shall be heard no more at all in you, for your merchants were the great men of the earth. For by your sorceries were all nations deceived. So in most translations, your King James Version and your New King James Version, various translations, you're going to see the word sorcery. Okay? In the Scriptures version that I'm using here, it says drug sorceries. The reason for this is, if you go into the Greek, you will find the term here for sorcery is farmakeia. And farmakeia may sound very familiar to you. It gives us such words such as pharmacy and pharmaceutical. This word is very fascinating in the Greek in the book of Revelation, because when you look it up, it has very, very deep meanings pertaining to sorcery. If we look the word pharmakeia up in the Strong's Concordance, we see it as G5331, and it comes from G5332. It means medication, giving us the word pharmacy. By extension, meaning magic, literally or figuratively, it also means sorcery and witchcraft. In the Thayer's Greek lexicon, we read, it means the use or the administering of drugs, poisoning, sorcery, magical arts, often found in connection with adultery and fostered by it. It is usually used as a metaphor for the deceptions and seductions of adultery. Again, this word derives from the literal Greek word meaning medication, and it gives us the word pharmacy today. So this term sorcery in the book of Revelation, it was used to deceive the whole world. But what did the book of Revelation say before that? That Satan, the serpent of old, had deceived the whole world. The serpent deceived the whole world using what? Using farmakeia, which is what? Medication or poisons. Gives us the term pharmacy. Now we have heard more about pharmaceuticals in the last couple of years since 2020 than ever before. And even before that, we heard about it nonstop. All the commercials, all the advertisements, and you'd hear the long lists of all of the destructive things that, you know, the side effects it might cause. Maybe you have restless leg syndrome. Maybe you have some little minor, problem, but you take this pill, it's going to cure your restless leg syndrome, but you might have a heart attack, you might go schizophrenic, you might want to kill yourself, suicidal tendencies. And this is not even a joke. These are literally how most of these ads sound, and we've heard this. But now, since 2020, when the whole world shut down because of the novel coronavirus that was released from a laboratory that the powers that be created, right? Now we know this. Of course, you couldn't say that the whole year of 2020, but you can say that now. It's convenient. You can say that now. We know this. And as soon as this thing was released, what did we hear about? Oh, there's going to be injections. There's going to be inoculations. We've got farmakeia. We're brewing some farmakeia. We're going to have it in warp speed. And the whole world foamed at the mouth over this. Yes, give us this farmakeia. We need farmakeia. We never could survive. You know, the atheists say we've been here for billions of years or millions of years without those things. We don't even believe that we've been here that long. But anyway, the point is that, it doesn't even make logical sense. And we all know it. But there's a deeper reason, and that is because Satan uses the farmakeia to deceive the whole world and has already deceived the whole world with many other means, not just the farmakeia. But the farmakeia is the special ingredient that the whore of Babylon uses in these last days.
We have been told to just trust the science. But what science exactly? Because you see, the mRNA technology that is being used in these injections is a gene therapy. And mRNA technology has never been used on humans. Due to the pandemic, the injections were given an emergency use act and have never even been tested on humans. It has never even been tested on animals. And yet here we are. The human trials are happening as we speak, contrary to the Nuremberg codes. And yet this experimental shot has been both mandated and even incentivized with things like lotteries. This notion of blindly trusting in science reminds me of the thalidomide crisis. In the late 1950s and early 1960s, thalidomide was marketed to help pregnant women who were suffering from morning sickness. The use of thalidomide in 46 countries by women who were pregnant or who were going to become pregnant ended up resulting in what has been called the biggest man-made medical disaster ever. This resulted in 10 to 20,000 children being born with a range of severe deformities such as missing arms, legs, eyes, and facial deformities, as well as thousands of miscarriages. And these photos are heartbreaking. You hear stories of parents who literally killed their children. They call them sympathy kills. Like they felt so terrible for their child. It was in such agony and such pain. It was terrible. It was a terrible thing that took place. Inoculations have a protected status in the USA, and pharmaceutical companies cannot be sued if their injections cause physical harm. So why would anyone want to take such an unnecessary risk when something like this, the thalidomide crisis, happened just 60 years ago, and it was a worldwide disaster? Now, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen here. However, it is worth noting the history, just to be fair, that things like this do happen. And they happen to people who did not know they were going to happen while they were taking the farmakeia, the pharmaceuticals. Big Pharma is probably the most powerful entity on earth. It has demonstrated that time and time again, that it is literally above the law, that it has well enough funds and resources to squash any type of lawsuits that may come against it. And it has its lobbyists in Washington and the bureaucrats and all these who are involved heavily in making sure that Big Pharma continues to grow in wealth. And now we see that Big Pharma is literally probably as powerful as many nations, with the way that it is distributing its pharmaceuticals for this so-called pandemic worldwide. The book of Revelation chapter 9 verse 20, and the rest of mankind who were not killed by these plagues did not repent of the works of their hands, that they should not worship the demons and idols of gold and of silver and of brass and of stone and of wood, which are neither able to see nor to hear nor to walk. And they did not repent of their murders, nor of their drugs, sorceries, their farmakeia, nor of their whoring, nor of their thefts. And if you asked anybody about theft, they would say, yeah, that's a sin. If you ask anybody about murder, sure, that's a sin. What about adultery? Absolutely, that's a sin. What about pharmaceuticals? What about going to that pharmacy? What about farmakeia? Oh, now we've got all kinds of excuses why it's okay. You see how that works. Now, it's very interesting. Now, we read this word, farmakeia, comes from another word. Let's look up this word. It appears in the book of Revelation, chapter 21, verse 8. But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone. This is the second death. The term sorcerer here is this word that gives us farmakeia. This is G5332. It is pharmakeos or pharmakeos and pharmakon. These words mean a drug, a spell-giving potion, a druggist or a pharmacist, a poisoner by extension of being a pharmacist, a magician, a sorcerer. Thayer's Greek lexicon states pharmakeos, one who prepares or uses magical remedies, a sorcerer. So making magical remedies, using alchemy to try and create these foreign substances by synthesizing them and using them on the population, this makes you a sorcerer. You are pharmakeos. So this is really important. Very important to understand. That means that all these people pushing this in these last days are false prophets pushing what
Exactly. They're pushing a religion. You see, farmakeia is the religion and attached to the religion of the Greco-Roman Empire.
Standing in the office of the prophet of God, I execute judgment on you, COVID-19. I execute judgment on you, Satan, you destroyer, you killer. You get out, you break your power, you get off this nation. I demand judgment on you. I demand a vaccination to come immediately.
Yes.
The Greek impact on modern medicine and the pharmaceutical industry can be felt in a strong way to this very day, not just in the term pharmaceutical or pharmacy, but also by the very fact that the father of modern medicine is Hippocrates of Kos. He was a Greek physician. He is regarded to be one of the most outstanding and influential figures throughout the history of modern medicine. Historians seem to agree that Hippocrates was born sometime around the year 460 BC. His contributions to modern medicine include the use of prognosis, clinical observation, and the systematic categorization of diseases. He is also credited with greatly advancing the systematic study of clinical medicine, which is farmakeia. The Hippocratic school of medicine, or farmakeia, saw Greek medicine as a discipline that was distinct from all the other fields and is credited with establishing medicine as a profession. To this very day, graduates in the medical profession and others in the medical community make common use of the Hippocratic Oath. The Hippocratic Oath is an oath of ethics taken by physicians for over 2,000 years. It is the most widely known and circulated Greek medical and religious text. In the original Greek, it requires a new physician to swear by a number of healing deities to uphold various standards dealing with the overall morality and ethics of the initiate. The original Greek document starts, "I swear by Apollo, the physician, and Asclepius, and Hygeia, and Panacea, and all the gods and goddesses, making them my witnesses, that I will fulfill according to my ability and judgment this oath and this covenant." The oldest partial fragments of the oath date to about 275 AD. The oldest full-length version dates to roughly the 10th or 11th century and is held in the Vatican's library, and that is not a surprise. But we see today the oath takes out the name of Apollo and Asclepius and Hygeia and Panacea and instead just says, "I swear." But according to the ancient mystery religions, that's fine. As long as there was an oath originally to the deity, you can leave out his name. So when they give this modified version of the Hippocratic Oath, yes, today they've left out Apollo. Some of them still will use it, however, but some of them have left it out. And okay, so basically people think that means, oh, they took out the paganism. All the paganism has been removed from the medical community. No, that's a joke. That's so silly. No. Again, in the mystery schools, it is perfectly acceptable in paganism to leave the deity's name out of the oath. This is still an oath to Apollo. Now, the book of Revelation mentions Apollo by name. In the book of Revelation, chapter 9, verse 11, we read, "And they have over them a sovereign, the messenger, the malach, or people call it angel, of the pit, of the deep, whose name is in Hebrew is Abaddon. But in Greek he has the name Apollyon or Apollyon. Apollyon is a play on Apollo's title as destroyer, which is Apollon. Some copies of the book of Revelation simply just say Apollo. Apollo is closely related to Helios, the solar deity of the Greeks, along with Sol and Mithra. This was well understood and received in the ancient world, as we see in the description at Nimrod Dag, where the single sculpture of Apollo bears the names Apollo, Mithras, Helios, and Hermes, all being famous solar deities born on the winter solstice around December 25th and claiming to resurrect, a counterfeit to the true Messiah. In certain variations of mythology, Apollo and Mithras seem to basically be a title of Helios. Apollo is thought to have perhaps come to Greece through the Phoenicians via the worship of Baal or Baal, the very one that is mentioned in the scriptures. In the Greek mythology, Apollo was a son of Zeus and even rivaled Zeus in his position as chief of the Greek deities. Apollo was not just a solar deity, however, but he was the chief physician, a healing deity above all others. In fact, there were no other healing deities in the ancient world, that is, until Apollo conceived a son through a human princess named Coronis, whose masculine form of the name is Corona. The feminine is Coronis. That's an interesting connection. Genesis, Bereshith chapter 6, talks about these connections of these fallen deities mixing with humans, except they are actually fallen messengers, malachim, or what people call angels. Genesis 6 verse 4. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days and also afterward, when the sons of Elohim came to the daughters of men and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, the men of name. All cultures relate a narrative when the supposed gods came down and mated with human women. This narrative in the scriptures is a bit different, of course, as again, these were not so-called gods, even though they could fool people, but rather they were fallen angels or malachim, messengers. The very term Nephilim, which refers to their offspring, which were human hybrids, literally means fallen ones. This is referenced even further in the book of Enoch, that tells us that the fallen ones taught humans medicine or farmakeia, war, weapons, abortion, and ultimately enslaved humanity, and would even eat humans and drink their blood for sacrifice. This narrative relates to all civilizations in the past, from ancient Mesoamerica all the way to Mesopotamia, the Near East to the very Far East. The four corners of the earth seem to be steeped in the worship of these Nephilim beings. It really does seem that all over the world, religion is personified in the worship of these fallen ones. In ancient Israel, Apollo would have been known as Baal Shamash. These names may have changed as the places and people changed, the geography and the times changed. However, the essential story seems to remain similar enough all over the world to see that this indeed, something to this effect, took place. And this is these men of name. That is where these myths from Greece and Rome come about the deities having wives that were humans and having demigods such as Hercules, or in this case, Apollo has his son Asclepius. Now, some variations of the myth say that Apollo just brought forth his son all on his own without the need of a human consort. That part doesn't really matter, but what does matter is the son of Apollo was known as Asclepius. Though he was originally counted as a mortal, he was eventually deified and worshipped amongst the other deities at Mount Olympus. Asclepius was thought to have left behind an earthly line of physicians. In fact, Hippocrates, the father of modern medicine, is actually said to be a direct descendant of Asclepius. The staff of Asclepius is the most used symbol for medicine and health in the entire world. In fact, we see the World Health Organization's symbol is in fact the staff of Asclepius imposed over the entire world, which gives us several meanings. First of all, This staff of Asclepius represents farmakeia. Therefore, it shows us that farmakeia rules over the world. Not only this, but it shows the serpent. And it was who? That serpent of old who deceived the whole world. And how? Using what? Sorcery, which is the pharmacy, the pharmaceutical. Big Pharma has deceived the entire world by the means of the staff of the son of Apollo. We must decide, will we bow to the staff of the son of Apollo, or will we bow to the staff of the great creator of heaven and earth, whose name is Yahuwah, the Elohim of Israel? Now, this is really important to understand concerning this staff, because you see it everywhere. You see it imposed on ambulances, you see it at the pharmacy, you see it at the hospitals, you see variations. Sometimes you see the staff of Mercury instead, or the staff of Hermes. But in Greek mythology, the rod or staff of Asclepius is also known as the Asclepian. It is a serpent entwined rod that is wielded by this Greek deity known as Asclepius. According to the ancient Greco-Roman religions, which are now known as mythology, Asclepius was born in Thessaly, in the middle of Greece, where the first Asclepian was established. The Asclepian was a term used in ancient Greece to define a type of temple devoted to the deity Asclepius, which acted as a healing center. Asclepians, or temples to Asclepius, are considered to be the origins to the Western world's first hospital. The fact that the Asclepian, a temple to the son of Apollo, was the original hospital is well accepted in the medical community and can be verified on various government sites such as the PubMed site and other well-known medical sites online. This notion is actually without dispute in the medical community. There were around 300 Asclepians in the ancient world, the most important being Epidaurus in Greece, which is also the world's first psychiatric hospital. The Hippocrates text and advanced surgical tools have been found at excavations at Epidaurus. The Asclepian of Epidaurus gave birth to many other Asclepions throughout the Greek and eventually the Roman empires. These hospitals were well known throughout the ancient world. In fact, the second most important Asclepion is located at the base of the Pergamon Acropolis in Turkey. And yes, this is the same Pergamon that is mentioned in the book of Revelation. So let us read the quote in Revelation chapter 2, verse 12. And to the messenger of the assembly in Pergamos write, he who has the sharp two-edged sword says this, I know your works, and where you dwell, where the throne of Satan is. No doubt the largest attraction in Pergamos was the Asclepion, the ancient hospital, or as Revelation chapter 2 verse 12 seems to imply, possibly the very throne of Satan, which makes sense again because the symbol of Asclepius was the serpent, the old serpent. In Greek mythology, the serpent is a wise being that brings healing and brings all types of delights to humanity. Whereas the serpent in our scriptures, the Nahash, is an enchanting warlock serpent that does witchcraft and uses farmakeia or drug sorcery to deceive and ensnare the entire earth, which is what we literally see happening. So that's interesting. The fact that Yahuchanan, who is called John, the writer of the book of Revelation, was well aware of the cult of Asclepius and his cultic worship at the Asclepion, the ancient hospitals, cannot be ignored. In fact, this key helps us understand many of the potent prophecies throughout the book of Revelation. Patients coming to the Asclepia would take cleansing baths before entering the main Asclepion. Inside there, they were examined by the priests and were issued certain areas inside the Asclepion. Sacrifice and offerings were made, usually in the form of gold, silver, or even marble sculptures of the body part that they wanted healed. Sometimes coins were tossed into a sacred spring. The priest invoked suggestive prayers, invoking a spirit of prophecy from the deity. Inscriptions found in marble plaques describing treatment of some diseases and the sum of money paid for every treatment have been found. These were the first medical records and fees in ancient Greece. Patients followed many instructions from the priest, taking daily baths, exercises, massages, and even entertainment, attending theater. Special diets or fasting would take place, along with the use of many kinds of farmakeia, or medicine, that were prescribed. The main diseases treated in the Asclepia were chronic neuropsychological disorders, skin diseases, and chronic lung diseases. Eventually, the patient would be given the opportunity to sleep in the most sacred chamber of the hospital, or Asclepion, the temple, to Asclepius. And this sacred chamber is referred to as the abaton. They would be put into a hypnotic state there, likely using hallucinogenics. And there in the abaton, they would incubate dreams. The abaton was a pit where they would lay there in a hypnotic state to have some type of dream or out of normal conscious state, where they could report those dreams or visions to the priest, and he would use the interpretation of the vision or the dream to prescribe the appropriate medication or the remedy that would be used from the dream. This Greek word abaton is very interestingly close to the Hebrew word Abaddon. We saw, of course, that Apollo's name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon. But in Greece, his sacred chamber, his son's sacred chamber to incubate dreams for healing, is called an abaton with a T sound, not a D sound. However, you can hear this similar wordplay. Surely there's a reason for that. There has to be some connection, and I do believe that it's obvious, because in the Hebrew, the word Abaddon refers to a pit. In fact, it often is correlated with the word Sheol, which means grave, which is oftentimes translated as hell, but it literally just means grave. But for instance, in the book of Proverbs, chapter 27, verse 20, hell is what the King James Version says, which is Sheol, and destruction, or Abaddon, are never full, so the eyes of man are never satisfied. There are several other verses where Sheol and Abaddon are mentioned as being places together, so I'm not going to go through all that right now. But the point is there's a connection. So Abaddon is some type of dark, destructive place, or malak, or both, okay, depending on how you interpret scriptures. It seems like it's both, that has to deal with Sheol. So it is classically understood, of course, that if this is Apollo, who is Abaddon, the destroyer, then of course this is likely the Satan. Or depending on how you understand the text, there could be many Satans. There could be a few Satans, actually. But the classical Satan, okay? So this is really all very important to understand how all this worked. Because, again, at the Asclepion, they worshipped the serpent. They literally worshipped the snake because they believed that Asclepius could manifest in this form. In fact, they believed that a giant serpent would visit in the form of Asclepius, and they would worship and offer sacrifices to this serpent, which again is just a metaphor for the Satan. Giant non-venomous snakes were allowed to roam totally free in the Asclepion, as Asclepius, the son of Apollo, was always associated with serpents for so many reasons. One reason being that they used viper's venom in various healing rituals. The deity supposedly appeared to a wealthy man in Pergamon and prescribed that he should drink every day of the drug produced from the vipers and should anoint the body from the outside. The venom of a viper, being deadly in the bloodstream, can be safely drunken, however. So this was often used as a medicine. The use of poison as a remedy by the Greeks is most likely why the term pharmakon meant drug, medicine, and poison in ancient Greek. The serpent was thought to rejuvenate itself by the shedding of its skin, and rejuvenation and healing were synonymous with serpents and physicians. Anyone who was healed was required to offer a sacrifice and bow to the idol of Asclepius and the serpent, the Nahash. Asclepius was said to have healed so many people that Hades, the deity of the underworld, complained to Zeus that he would upset the natural order of death amongst the mortals and challenged the immortality of the deities. For this reason, Asclepius was struck down by Zeus. After the death of Asclepius, he was placed amongst the stars in the constellation known as the Serpent Holder. And according to some versions of this tale, he was eventually resurrected and placed as a deity on Mount Olympus by Zeus. Now, some of this information is not really all that important. I've given you some of this information just to kind of really fill in the gaps so that you understand the history, because it is a rich history. And again, some of this information isn't going to pertain to you today directly to know that there were giant non-venomous snakes crawling around the Asclepian and that people incubated the dreams. But the reason I want you to understand these things is that people didn't believe that Apollo was just some deity way off in the heavens somewhere. They believed that he was prophetic. Matter of fact, he had a prophetess at Delphi where he would speak through her oracles. She was called an oracle. And, this is all well known. So the worship of Apollo and Asclepius and Hygeia and Panacea, this was a prophetic type of worship. And this is something I also want to emphasize to you, because they were seeking dreams and visions from false deities and receiving them according to their testimonies. So there was that part of it. But then the straightforward, obvious is the poison, the injection. When you think about the poison of a snake bite, and the fang goes into the flesh and injects that poison, it's so perfect that Nahash would mean sorcerer, and that it would also point to farmakeia when you think about it in those terms for these last days concerning the snake bite. If you have eyes to see and ears to hear, you know what I'm talking about. Now in Revelation chapter 6 verse 2 we read, "And I saw and behold a white horse, and he that sat on him had a bow, and a crown was given unto him. And he went forth conquering and to conquer." This is the classical first of the four horsemen who goes forth to conquer. And it's really important to understand this notion here, because this first horseman, when he goes forth, it says he has a bow. And when we look up this, we know that Apollo was actually the deity of archery. It's kind of interesting. The first rider on the horse has a bow, and Apollo just happens to be the deity of archery. But this is where it even gets even more interesting. You see, the Greek word for bow is toxon, the same word that gives us toxicity and toxic. This word toxon is so called because the aim of the Greek was not to just kill you with the arrow because he hit you precisely in the heart or wherever he may have hit you, but it was so that if he hit you at all, you were poisoned. So there was poison in the arrows. So they dipped it, and there was an arrow, and they shoot it into you, and then it goes into your bloodstream, and it kills you. So the rider with the white horse goes forth with a toxon. He goes forth with something toxic. And he has a crown. The Greek word for a crown is Stephanos, like the word Stephen, name Stephen. But what's interesting is the Latin term, which is the very language of the beast, the Roman beast, is Latin. That's the language. The Latin term for the crown is corona. Corona. So you see this first horseman, he goes forth with a corona crown, and he goes forth with a toxon in his hand. Is any of this starting to make sense? It should. It's very interesting to note all these things together when you study them, because you see the CDC, when they first announced that the coronavirus was coming, and they made this big article about it. They actually wrote up an article about Helios, which is one of the titles of Apollo. And they show an image of Helios from Pergamos, the same Pergamos where Satan's seat is. You can't make this stuff up. And it's literally all about how the coronavirus is named this because it looks like a corona. For those of you who don't know, a corona is a halo or a helios that goes around the sun. It is the halo, the circle around the sun, the sun's crown, which is why Apollo's crown is called corona. Why he is often also called corona, because he is Helios. And remember, he had a sexual relationship with a princess named Coronis. You see all these. Why did the CDC send out this write-up that you can look at the very image? It starts out with the very image of Apollo with his corona crown, and he has 4 horsemen. 4 horses, I should say, not horsemen, on his chariot. He's riding his famous chariot, and there are 4 horses, just like the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. And is this all just coincidence? This is all just a coincidence? No. Satan deceived the world. The scriptures are true. He used drug, sorcery, or farmakeia, and he's still using it to deceive the world. This is true. You know, Apollo's number, many people don't know this. I'm going to wrap this up with this. If you've ever heard this said, you've probably only heard it from me, because nobody else really touches this. But for some reason, in the ancient world, the solar deities had various magical squares that were attributed to them. Not just the solar deities, but the other classical planets as well. Magical square amulets to protect you from the deity, because, you know, the deities were mean and they would strike you down. They would, you know, give you leprosy. They would sleep with your wife. They would do a number of things. So you had to have protection from the things you were worshiping. If you were a Greek or Roman or Babylonian, all the systems had it the same way. The heavens were divided into 36 bodies. The sun was number 1, the moon was number 2, on and on and on and on till you get to 36. But the sun was unique because it ruled over all the other heavenly bodies. Therefore, you would add up all the numbers 1 through 36 in the magical square. You can find these online. And they add up to 666. This was the number of Apollo. He was the sun deity, the Helios. The Caesar claimed to be the Helios at times. See, this is what happens. Just like Pharaoh, he claimed to be Ra, the sun deity. So his number would have been 666. Therefore, the Apollo, his number, the corona, the Helios, the halos of the sun, his number is 666. And we know this because Yahuwah said, let he who has wisdom calculate the number of the beast. Therefore, Yahuwah has given great wisdom in these last days to understand these secret matters that belong to Yahuwah. When this Apollo comes, he will come with answers. He will come bringing cures. He will come bringing prophetic dreams and visions, and people will think that it is Yahushua. They will call him Jesus and Jesus and Jesus and Yeshua and everything you can possibly imagine. And this being will bring healing, but he comes with an army of locust beings when we read it in the text, and they come with the ability to sting the men who have the mark of the beast, and their sting is like a scorpion when it stings a man. My advice for you, brothers and sisters, is come out of Babylon, my people, that you do not partake of her sins. Stop consulting with the priests of Asclepius. Stop consulting with the poisons and the pharmacon and the farmakeia. Stop going to the Asclepions, my friends. Yahuwah will heal. Yahuwah Rapha means Yahuwah who heals. Yahuwah be with you. May he heal you. May he be with you to protect you, to lead you and guide you through the opposition that you will face as you walk down this straight and narrow path. Shalom.